everyone. Good morning. My name is Claire Sakaki. I am the executive director here at Bard. It's wonderful to see you all here this glorious morning. And I would like to introduce the incredible Dr. Paul Budra. Many of you know Paul. He probably doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to do so anyway. Paul is a professor and chair of English Studies at Simon Fraser University. He is the author of many books and articles on Shakespeare and other classical literature. He's been a friend and a lecturer here at Bard for many years, and we're so delighted to have him back. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Paul Budra.
Thank you so much, Claire, and thank you to everyone here at Bard and the Beach, especially the volunteers who give up their time to come out on a beautiful Saturday morning. Thank you to Mary, whose idea was to have this series of lectures some 9 years ago. This is the 9th year that we've been doing this, and SFU has been sponsoring it, which is mind-blowing. And it's really, I'm a little nervous today because this is the first time that this has ever been filmed. And they didn't tell you this, but it's being filmed in 3D IMAX. And simulcast around the world and to the International Space Station. So, I better be careful. So, for those of you who haven't been here before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk for maybe 40 minutes or something like that, and I will leave at least 15 minutes for questions. So, that's the plan. Okay? Much ado about nothing. Let's start this by talking about comedy. When I talked about Winter's Tale, I talked about the Romance tradition. Comedy was a more well-established genre in Shakespeare's time. And Shakespeare had inherited two sort of models of comedy. One, which I've spoken about in previous lectures, came from Latin literature. When Shakespeare was a schoolboy, he read Latin literature. And he read Roman playwrights. And the Roman playwrights of comedy that he would have read were two guys called Plautus and Terence. And a typical Roman comedy was about a young couple who are, I won't say in love, this was ancient Rome, they were in lust. They wanted to, as the young people say today, hook up. But this was a pre-Tinder generation. And there was always some impediment to their hooking up. There was a father. There was a law. There was some authority figure who got in the way. So with the help often of a wily servant, the young people deke around this impediment and hook up and usually get the old guy's money too. So comedies were, and to a large extent still are, about sex and money. But there's another tradition that Shakespeare inherited, a tradition of romantic love. And that tradition, which I've spoken about in previous seasons, goes back to April 6, 1327. Yes, I can name it exactly. April 6, 1327, when an young Italian man who was planning to become a priest, Francesco Petrarca, also known as Petrarch, walked into a church in Avignon, saw a woman, and fell madly and hopelessly in love with her. Her name was Laura. He could never have her. She was above his station. She was married. He never even spoke to her. But he went away and he wrote a series of important, influential, and very serious poems about his love fixation with Laura, treating her as an idol to be worshipped, something that made him burn but froze him out. And these poems, called the Rima Sparsa, became incredibly influential and are responsible for many of our ideas about romantic love that persist to this day. For example, love at first sight. And Shakespeare sort of takes that romantic tradition, which he addresses specifically in his sonnets, and combines it with the Roman comic tradition. And what you have are plays by Shakespeare in which you have a young couple who are not in lust, they are in love. They want to get married, usually love at first sight. There is again an impediment, but somehow they get around that person or that law or whatever it is so that they are, at the end of the play, betrothed. Right? So it's not about sex, it's about true love. So that's his sort of model. And he does variations on it in a number of his plays, a lot of his comedies, and even in one of his tragedies, Romeo and Juliet. The first half is based on that model. Now, this model is so important to understand Much Ado About Nothing. I would like to very quickly demonstrate it by writing with you a Shakespearean comedy. Very quickly. Give me the name of a female protagonist. Julia. Give me a male name, and it better not be Antonio. Male name? What? Oh, dear God. What's that?
Fabio.
Fabio, thank you. So we have Julia and Fabio. Now we need an evil authority figure, maybe a politician. Stephen? What? Donald Trump. I never would have thought of that. So let us set our play in Vancouver. What we would have is Julia and Fabio, because they're young people in Vancouver, are doing something repulsively athletic. They're doing Zumba on a paddleboard or something. They fall in love with each other. They want to get married. She says, "You have to. I live in Washington State. I'm American. Let's go across the border and meet my parents." But guess what? The evil Donald passes law prohibiting the immigration of Canadians because they're smuggling maple syrup and poutine, and as he likes to call them, bad hosers. Right? So she has to disguise herself as a lumberjack to get back into Canada. And now we have another element that Shakespeare adds to his comedies that not all other writers do. Something I'm going to talk about in a few minutes called bro culture. A lot of the young men in Shakespeare's comedies are all about the guys. They have this sort of toxic masculinity, this testosterone, this sort of frat boy attitude towards women. And they have to learn to get beyond it. So she, our friend Julia, disguised as a lumberjack, goes and spies on Fabio and watching him be a bro. And she works her way into his group of bros, right? And then one day he says, "Hey, you want to go with the guys?" She goes, "Yeah." And he says, "Okay, we're going to this cool place. It's at the north end of Vancouver. The far end of Vancouver." She goes, "Fine. Wreck Beach, where all is revealed." And they review their vows of love while the sun sets over Vancouver Island. Perfect Shakespearean comedy. Okay, we got the authority figure, we got the bro culture, we've got cross-dressing, and what should we call this play? Because it is set in Vancouver and starts in Stanley Park, we will call it Love's Labor's Lost Lagoon. So now you've got the model. Let's go to the Much Ado About Nothing. Much Ado About Nothing is in Sicily, in the town of Messina, where the governor is Leonato. He has a daughter named Hero of marriageable age. He also has a niece, Beatrice, a little bit older, also of marriageable age. He gets news that Prince Don Pedro of Aragon has returned from the wars and is going to be passing through. So he invites Don Pedro and his men to stay with him for a while. Right? Don Pedro has in his company his discontent brother, Don John, but he also has a young man of marriageable age called Claudio and a slightly older young man of marriageable age called Benedict. So we see where this is going. Right? We know it's going to happen. Claudio is going to love Hero. Benedict is going to love Beatrice, and we have not one but two authority figures to impede and mess things up, to stop them, to try to prevent them. Leonato and Don Pedro. Right? It's simple. The play then goes into those two stories, the Claudio story and the Beatrice and Benedict story. So there's an A story and a B story. And this is typical of comedies. Tragedies usually only have one storyline. They focus on a single protagonist. The first tragedy that actually has a subplot of any significance is King Lear. Before that, tragedies are very focused, but comedies tend to have a broader social focus and very often have two storylines. To this day, If you watch a television sitcom, Friends or Seinfeld or The Big Bang Theory, watch carefully. There will usually be two storylines, and scriptwriters call them the A story and the B story. So Shakespeare does this too. So the A story is Claudio and Hero. Claudio sees Hero and is immediately smitten, incredibly smitten. His language is over the top. As soon as he sees this woman, he starts talking about her beauty. He says to Benedick, "Did you see her?" And Benedick said, "Well, yeah, I saw her." He said, I think it's the fairest woman I ever did see. And Benedick, "Well, are you going to buy her? Why are you asking after her?" And he says, "Can the world buy such a jewel?" Right? So we get this over-the-top young love. Right? Now, we know what's supposed to happen. Leonardo is supposed to prevent them from getting together. But guess what? Leonardo finds out that Claudio is in love with Hero, and he goes, "All right, that's great. Best news ever." Don Pedro, okay, another authority figure, another one who should be an impediment to the arrangement, he finds out that Claudio is in love with Hero, and he goes, "That's great. It's so great, I'm actually going to help you get her." And not just negotiate a marriage deal, he actually says, "Okay, there's a masked ball tonight. We're all going to be masks. I'll pretend I'm you and do the wooing for you." A little bit odd. And the only way I think you can rationalize it is if Claudio is not the brightest light in the harbor. Okay? It's like, "Claudio, you like the girl, but I'll do the talking." Okay? And so this is what Don Pedro does. Evil Don John, the evil half-brother of Don Pedro, hears about this, and it's sort of frat boy politics. Not that he can gain anything from it, but just make trouble. He whispers in Claudio's ear, Don Pedro really wants to marry Hero himself. And Claudio, for a minute, believes it. Would rather believe a guy, right, than a woman. Don Pedro says, "No, it's all good. You are betrothed, and everything is fine." So there has been no impediment to this. These kids have been pushed together by the authority figures. So you see how Shakespeare's changed the comic model. Right? Now, Don John and his evil henchman, Borachio, which is a great name for an evil henchman, Borachio, come up with another plan. Borachio says, "Here's the deal. I'm having an affair with Hero's lady-in-waiting, a woman called Margaret. And I'm going to arrange to be with Margaret in Hero's bedroom tomorrow night. You bring Claudio and Don Pedro somewhere where they can see in the window, and it'll look like Hero is having an affair with another man." Right? And we've got to assume that Margaret must look a bit like Hero, but there's something else which I find a little bit creepy. Borachio says, "Okay, how are we going to do this?" Well, part of it here is, while he is canoodling with Margaret, here's what he says. "Offer them this instances, which shall bear no less likelihood than to see me at her chamber window. Hear me call Margaret Hero, and hear Margaret term me Claudio." I understand that there are some people who spice up their erotic lives through role-playing, taking on characters. You be Wonder Woman, I'll be Batman. You be Angela Merkel, I'll be Putin. Sparks will fly. But you pretend to be your boss, and I'll pretend to be your boss's boyfriend? Ew. Anyway, it works. It works. It fools not only Claudio, but Don Pedro. And then Claudio, in an incredibly mean move, and between you and me, I hate Claudio. Claudio, at the wedding, at the wedding, in front of the congregation, they're just about to get married, denounces Hero as a trollop, as a tramp, as a spoiled fruit, and storms off. Hero faints. Leonardo, at first, believes this of his daughter. Why would the prince say something like this, right? Oh, my God, my girl is unchaste. The priest says, no, can't be. Here's the deal. She's fainted. People might think she's dead. Give out that she's dead, and then Claudio will repent. Guess what? Claudio is such a jerk. He doesn't repent. At no point, am I wrong about this, Mary? No. At no point does he show any remorse. The next couple of days, he's like joking around, hanging out with the boys, right? No remorse at all. Well, Borachio gets discovered by the local constabulary. A confession is forced from him, right? He gives it up, and it's revealed. Claudio, of course, suddenly, for the first time, feels bad. Leonardo says, okay, I want you to go to my daughter's tomb, hang an epitaph, sing a hymn, and then tomorrow you have to marry my niece, sight unseen. And so Claudio says, okay. Again, Claudio, his elevator doesn't go to the top floor. He shows up, and he marries a woman wearing a veil. Yes, I'll marry you. Takes out the veil. Oh, it's Hero. And for some reason, we're supposed to accept that they're going to live happily ever after. And the only way we can accept that is by realizing that this story of Hero and Claudio is got a lot of fairy tale elements to it. There is a long tradition of stories in medieval romances and in fairy tales and in folklore of a woman unjustly accused of infidelity or being unchaste. And after all sorts of trials and tribulations, it's revealed she was chaste. So there's this sort of tradition of that. And this story doesn't work realistically, but as a fairy tale, it sort of works. The problem is the B story, Benedick and Beatrice. Now, Benedick and Beatrice, there is no impediment to them getting together. In fact, we learned they used to have some sort of fling that went sour. And now, whenever they see each other, they're at each other's throats. Leonardo calls it a merry war. It ain't so merry. So I'm just at the very first time that they meet. I mean, the very first time they meet and talk, they have a fight. Benedick is saying something to himself, and Beatrice comes over and says, "I wonder that you are still talking, Signor Benedick. Nobody marks you." And he goes right back, "What, my dear Lady Disdain, are you yet living?" And he says, "Is it possible Disdain should die while she hath such meat food to feed it as Signor Benedict?" Meow, meow. Right? So they're at each other all the time. Now, the bizarre thing is, they're clearly perfect for each other. They're both incredibly sarcastic, they're witty, they're funny, but they are trapped by their personas. They have created a public image which has defined themselves. Benedict has defined himself as the single man, the man's man, who's not going to be bothered, not going to be hooped by some woman. He's not going to be sitting around with little children. No, he's going to be fighting and riding horses and doing guy things, right? He's a confirmed bachelor, right? And when he even thinks about what it would be like to have a woman, well, he sets the bar impossibly high. If I were to marry, what would she be like? Well, rich she shall be, certain. Wise, or I'll none. Virtuous, or I'll never cheapen her. Fair, or I'll never lick on her. Mild, or come not near. Noble, okay. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Good discourse, an excellent musician. All right? And then finally he gives one concession, and her hair shall be, what color it pleases God. So he sets this impossible bar. And Beatrice does exactly the same. When Don Pedro is saying, "Why don't you marry?" She goes on about how, well, I don't know, some are too young, some are too old. I don't want a husband. If God send me no husband, for the blessing I am him that upon my knees every morning, Lord. Lord, I would not endure a husband with a beard on his face. I'd rather lie in woolen, but I don't want one without a beard because then he's too young. What? So they've set up impossible goals for a romantic partner. But there are little bitty hints that maybe that they're perfect for each other. For at one point, Benedick is railing against Beatrice. He's with his friends, and here comes Beatrice, and he says, oh my God, here she comes, this monster, right? She speaks poignards, every word stabs, right? If her breath were as terrible as her termination, there'd be no living near her, right? And then she says something interesting. I would not marry her, though she were endowed with all that Adam had left him before he transgressed. Who was talking about marriage, dude? So there's something percolating in there. So Don Pedro says, we got to get these two together. And so he has some friends do a conversation where our friend Benedick can overhear it. And the conversation is, Beatrice loves Benedick so much. That poor woman, he is so cursed and proud, he'll never, she'll die. She'll just die before he'll stoop to love her. And Benedick suddenly realizes, oh my God, I am a jerk. And I have to change. And he has to rationalize it to himself, of course. How can I do this? How can I possibly be? Sorry, just trying to find it. Conversion, here we go. What's my justification to confirm bachelor? He says, well, when I said I would die a bachelor, I did not think I would live till I were married. So I hoped I'd die young. The ladies then play the same trick on Beatrice. They wait where she can overhear, and they say, oh, Benedick, that wonderful man, loves Beatrice so much. So Beatrice says, oh, I'm too cursed, I'm too sarcastic, I'm too mean. So now they both let their guards down, but they have to come together. And they come together after Claudio denounces Hero, after that horrible scene at the church, right, where Hero's taken off, they're going to fake her death, there's weeping, wailing, Leonardo, it's incredibly emotionally fraught. And after all the people have gone from the stage, and these two are left on stage, and Beatrice is just heartbroken by what has happened to her cousin, Benedick has this great line. It always makes me a little weepy when I see it in the theater. Finally, there's this pause, and he says, I do love nothing in the world so well as you. Is not that strange? And just this lovely, tentative moment. And Beatrice, it's harder for her to let down her guard, right? She wants to say, I love you. I can't. I want to. I can't. I want. She goes back and forth, but finally she does, right? And he says, ask me to do anything for you. And she says, kill Claudio. Now, a lot of people think that's the turning point in the play, right? Kill Claudio. It's not. That makes a good amount of sense. She's just seen her loving cousin disgraced, and now this man says he loves her. Well, he should defend her. So, yeah, kill Claudio. His immediate reaction is not for the wide world. And Beatrice takes him to task for it. Yeah, see, men, right? You talk and you talk and you talk. When push comes to shove, men are only turned into tongue, and trim ones too, right? All you are is talk. She goes on for this for a while, and then Benedick gets it. He says, think you in your soul, the Count Claudio hath wrong Hero. And Beatrice says, yea, as sure as I have a thought or a soul. And here's the turning point in the play. Claudio says, enough, I am engaged. So what he does in that moment is he drops the masculinity. He drops the bro culture, right? And he commits to the woman. He commits to the woman that he loves. I will work for you and not for these guys anymore. So I will be engaged, and that is, I am engaged, which means I will take on this challenge. I will challenge Claudio. But I can't help but here and there, enough I am engaged with engagement. All right? This is it. I'm committing to you now and not to the boys that I have been playing with all my life. And so he goes off and he challenges Claudio. And Claudio and Don Pedro, for the first part, don't even get it. They're still being dumb guys, masculine, right? Telling jokes, even though Hero is newly put into the grave, right? Until finally they realize, no, he's serious. And it's only when Baraccio spills the beans about what happened that our friend Benedick can pull back from this challenge. At the very end of the play, then, everything is settled. Everyone is going to be happy, but there's a problem. Benedick and Beatrice have declared their love to each other in private. Can they do it in public, where everyone knows their public personas? Benedick the bachelor, Beatrice the sarcastic, comic. So when they're in public, they have trouble. So Benedick, and all the people are looking, Benedick says to Beatrice, "Do you not love me?" And Beatrice says, "Why, no more than reason," right? And Beatrice says, "Do you not love me?" "Well, troth, no more than reason." So they've slipped back into their old roles because people are watching. Fortunately, they have both tried their hands at love poetry, written love poems to each other, which their relatives and friends have got, and which now they exchange to each other. Caught by your own words. Petrarch wrote sonnets, right? Here you are caught by the Petrarchan tradition, right? You're forced into romantic love. And so it ends happily. So, you see what Shakespeare's done then. He's taken that convention that we sort of explored in our brilliant little play and changed it. Instead of having an authority figure or a law impeding lovers, instead what we have is the lovers impeding themselves. We have Claudio being a bonehead. We have Beatrice and Benedick stuck in these roles that have defined them for so long. And when you put these two things together, the A plot and the B plot together, they comment upon each other. The Hero and Claudio fairy tale love story seems very unnatural when we compare it to Benedick and Beatrice, who are much more rounded human beings with very interesting personalities. And in fact, at various points in the plays, Benedick, or Shakespeare, through Benedick and Beatrice, comments upon the sort of standard love story that Claudio and Hero embody. So when it's publicly declared that Hero can marry Claudio right in front of Leonardo and Don Pedro, there's a moment of silence, and Beatrice steps forward and says, Count Claudio, speak, Count, 'tis your cue. That's how it works. It's a fairy tale, say your thing, right? And now to Hero, come on, you have to do it too. Either that or kiss him. That's what you do, right? That's how it works. Benedick does something similar. Late in the play, Benedick, when he's trying to write poems, why is Benedick writing poems? Because you're supposed to, right? It's a standard love story. So he's sitting there trying to write a poem. I cannot show my love in rhyme. I have tried. I can find out no rhyme to lady, but baby. All right? I was not born under a rhyming planet. All right? But it's what you do if you're in love, right? That's the standard thing. You're supposed to do this. A bit later, when Beatrice comes on stage and says, hey, let's go hear the news about Hero and how everything's figured out, he tries to speak in a sort of a Claudio-type elevated poetic language. He says, I will live in thy heart, die in thy lap, and be buried in thy eyes. And moreover, I will go with thee to thy uncles. Okay. So he tries, but it doesn't work. So the Beatrice and Benedick plot sort of comments upon the artificiality and the sort of supercilious romantic nature of the Hero and Claudio plot. Now, there's another element in here, and that is the law. And the law is represented in this play by Dogberry, constable. There are a number of policemen in Shakespeare. Dogberry and Elbow are the most famous. And they are inevitably, in Shakespeare, complete fools. And it was an expression in Shakespeare's time as dim as a constable. Now, the reason for this is there was no standing police force in England in the 16th century. And different towns, or in a big town, different parishes, would appoint someone to be a constable. No one wanted this job. No, it's the worst job ever. It doesn't really pay anything, maybe a little bit of money. You have to go around and squeal on your neighbors so they all hate you, right? So it usually went to the most pathetic person who couldn't get out of it in the village. So dim as a constable, all right? And the dimness of Dogberry, as well as Elbow, comes through in malapropisms. That is, he doesn't know how to use words properly. So, for example, he's talking to Leonardo. This is Dogberry at one point. And Leonardo's like, what are you saying? He says, neighbors, you are tedious. Get to the point. Dogberry takes this as a great compliment. Right. It pleases your worship to say so, but we are the poor duke's officer. But truly, for my own part, if I were as tedious as a king, I would find in my heart to bestow it all on your worship. Right. So he has no idea what the word tedious means. None. Zero. And he does that again and again. And what's the point here? And why do both Dogberry and Elbow make these sort of mistakes? Because law is based in language. Law is about definitions. What is theft? What is murder? Right? What is this crime? Right? What is a criminal? It's all about terminology. You will see that in The Merchant of Venice. And if you can't get the words right, how in the world are you going to get the law right? If you can't specify the crime, how are you going to prosecute criminals? And indeed, Dogberry, for most of the time, gives advice to his officers to avoid criminals. What if we tell someone to stop doing a bad thing? Well, just go away, right? He just doesn't want to deal with it. So we have a language of law which is ineffective. And I think there's a parallel there to sort of language of love within this play. Shakespeare's characters, in all his comedies of love, go into love with an assumption about what it's going to be like from what they've read, from Petrarch. And they discover that love is different for every person, for every couple. That erotic fascination is a messy thing. And there have to be compromises, and we have to let down our guards. We have to release our personas. We have to trust in the other person, right? We have to come up with our own law of love if we're going to succeed. Thank you. So we now have time for questions, and Mary will be passing a microphone to people who are asking the questions so that the people in the International Space Station can hear what you're saying. So please put up your hand, and Mary, right over here, right at the edge. There, first. Good. Hey.
Quick question on the most recent Much Ado About Nothing,
yes.
the Joss Whedon version.
Yes. Yes.
Do you have an opinion on it, and could you share it with us? Yes,
the Joss Whedon version. If you haven't seen this, Joss Whedon, the filmmaker, actually got a bunch of friends, actors, and shot a version of Much Ado About Nothing in his own home, right? Which is very cool. And I thought it was a very stylish and clever little production. There were some very nice touches. And I would say one thing, best Dogberry ever in that movie version, because he plays it, he downplays it. He does it sort of very, very quiet confidence in his own stupidity, and it's not over the top or physical. So I liked it very much. I thought I would recommend. I think it's on Netflix. So if you get a chance, see Joss Whedon's version of Much Ado About Nothing. Very stylish and clever. There was a gentleman right over here, Mary.
Don Pedro's motivation, I've never understood. Iago gives a long speech about how
You mean Don John?
Don John's.
Yeah.
Iago gives a long speech about why he was passed over for preferment. Edmund gives a long speech about bastardy. Don John just hates his brother. Most people don't.
Yes, Don John, the villain of the play, he has this one scene where he basically talks about how he's melancholy. He is what he is. He's a melancholy man, and now he's in a situation where I guess he's done something bad to his brother, but his brother has forgiven him, so he's on tenterhooks with his brother, and he says, if I had my teeth, I would bite, right? I want to burst out of this confinement. So he resents the position of powerlessness that he's in vis-a-vis his brother, and he's got this melancholy, dark disposition. He's also a bastard. Now, not all bastards, that is, people born out of wedlock, are bad. There are good bastards in Shakespeare. But there was a belief that bastards were more inclined to evil because of the sin of their inception. So, if a bastard goes bad, people go, bastard. Yeah, I get it. So I think you put all those things together and you get he's a rather two-dimensional villain. But I think the Shakespeare's audience would have taken those things as, yeah, I get it. Works for me. And let's remember in the Kenneth Branagh version of the film, he was played by Keanu Reeves. Okay. It never stops being funny. I don't know why. Although, Keanu actually played Hamlet in a production in the prairies, a stage production. Played Hamlet, which is, to be or what? I mean, it would have been... Anyway, sorry. Other people, other questions, please. Yes, around the front row.
I'm curious about the names Shakespeare gives his comedies. As You Like It, What You Will, Much Ado About Nothing. It gets to the point where you can't remember which one is which. None of them have anything to do with the play.
Yeah, that's a very good point. As we talked about during The Winter's Tale, if you went to see a tragedy, you knew what was going to happen just from the title of the play, right? The person in the title dies. That's simple. Whereas there's a tradition, and it's not just of Shakespeare, but of other comedies from this period of using some sort of catchphrase and naming a play after it. What would be what are catchphrases now? What are young people saying? What are their buzzwords today? Like? No, it'd be like having a play called Sup. Yeah. Hashtag comedy. Go see that. So there was a tradition of that, and it's not just Shakespeare. You see Ben Jonson does that, every man in his humor, right? There's an expression, there's a whole whack of them. And Shakespeare seems to have played along with that. And you're right, in a lot of cases it's not entirely clear what name has to do with the content of the play. It's almost an afterthought. So I suspect it was just a convention in Shakespeare's time that you give a comedy a light name, something that sounds familiar, and people went to it. But it's a good question. I've never seen anything done about that besides what I've just said. Yeah. Other questions? We've got time. Right there.
Hello. A lot of the plays are set in Italy or on the Mediterranean.
Yes.
Do you know if he ever traveled there or why he chose that setting?
Yes. Why did Shakespeare choose the Italian settings? Okay, there was two reasons. First of all, most of Shakespeare's stories and most of the stories and plays by his contemporary playwrights were borrowed. And Italy, because it started the Renaissance, had been producing literature, sort of secular literature, longer than anyone else. So if you wanted to find stories, and especially if you wanted to find stories of love and romance and sex and revenge, there was a huge Italian tradition of that, big books of these things. Parts of the plots from Much Ado About Nothing comes from an Italian writer called Bandello. So there was just this material to draw upon. That is one reason. The second reason, which is not really for comedies but more for tragedies, is the English had this love-hate relationship with Italy. They loved the fashion, they loved the art, best visual art in the world, of course, but they didn't understand the Italian political system. All these city-states, what the heck are those? And when Machiavelli comes along and writes about power politics, they think the Italians are crazy, right? They're devils, they're poisoning each other, they have no sense of loyalty, plus they're Catholics. Right? And so if you want to write about anything lurid, extreme, violent, disgusting, you said it in Italy. I am not kidding, by the way. There's a play called The Second Maiden's Tragedy, which is about necrophilia. Okay. There's a very famous play called 'Tis Pity She's a Whore, about consensual brother-sister incest, which ends with the brother cutting his sister's heart out and carrying it into a marriage with it on a knife. But hey, Italians. It could happen. So between those two, that's the reasons. I've got questions for a few more questions before we have to go outside. Time for a few more. Way at the back. Oh, Mary, you're going to earn your keep.
Okay, I'll get there.
So if you go away camping for a week, Mary, and now we make you do aerobics. Yeah.
The character of the fool, pervasive in so many of his plays. If you could address the generic role of the fool, and then does the role of the fool differ between genres, between tragedies and comedies and romances, etc.?
Okay, that's a good question. A lot has been written about this. There were two types of fools. There was a fool who was essentially a professional jester, sort of stand-up comedian who you had at court and who would be called upon to not only tell jokes, but to sing a dirty song, to juggle, to entertain, perhaps to arrange the entertainments for the evening. A professional sort of comic. An example might be the character of Jacques in As You Like It. There was another type of fool, and this is a little more disturbing for us. This is someone who we would say is developmentally challenged, someone who has some sort of mental impairment. And the English at this time, much to their disgrace, thought this was very amusing. And so they would often keep someone like that around because they thought it was funny. They thought this was humorous. And at the same time, they also believed that people with sort of different cognitive abilities might have the gift of prophecy, might be oracular in some way, may speak truths because of their altered mind that aren't apparent to the rest of us. And some people have argued that, for example, the fool in King Lear, right, who the King Lear refers to as a boy very often, is supposed to be presented as that way, that there's something slightly off about him, that he has a cognitive impairment, which allows him to get away with saying things to Lear that someone else wouldn't. So those are the two types of fools, and depending on which play you're reading, keep that in mind. Queen Elizabeth herself, she had I forget the fool's name, she also had a dwarf she kept at court, a female dwarf. There were very different ideas in this period about the treatment of special people. Yeah. That was sad. Okay, maybe two more questions, then we'll head outside. Yeah. Yes?
Hi, just to go back to the title.
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah, a lot of them, they are kind of throwaway titles, but this one, it seems a little on point, especially because I've read something about, like, nothing and noting, like actually paying attention to the words people are saying.
Okay.
Is there any comment about that?
Okay, my friend Kyle here is talking about the nothing, no thing, which was a potentially a sexual pun in Shakespeare's time. So if you remember in Hamlet, in the play within a play scene, Hamlet lies down beside, what's her name? The girl? Ophelia, thank you. I knew it was right there. Ophelia, funny name. And puts his head in her lap and makes a joke about, something between a woman's legs. No thing, right? Nothing. So it was pervasive. It was a sexual joke. And so some people said maybe in the title of this, Much Ado About No Thing, you could say, well, Hero never did betray. There was no thing that came, where, with Hero. And so it was all a big mistake. I don't know if I buy it. I think that might be a little over-ingenious, especially given the other sort of buzzword titles that comedies have in this period. But literary critics, they're such a suspicious bunch. they'll look for meaning anywhere. So thank you for reminding us of that as one possibility that there is a subtle sexual pun in the title of this play. I don't believe it. Okay. Any other questions? Oh, right there.
You were talking about Don John being a villain.
Yeah.
And I notice it's Jonna in here. It's a female.
Yes,
Why would they change it?
Well, okay. In all the productions, I've seen 3 of the 4 productions so far, and in a number of them, they change the gender of a character. Now, the reason you do this, of course, is there's not enough female roles in Shakespeare. There just aren't, right? Shakespeare's cast was all male, and he had boys and sometimes men playing the women roles, so he would keep them for the most part to a minimum. And so it's a male-heavy productions, male productions and plays were written with that in mind. But nowadays, we want as many women as male actors, so a lot of directors have taken various roles and just flipped the gender. And so they do it with that. They did it in The Winter's Tale. You'll see in Merchant of Venice, a couple of minor characters are made into women. And for the most part, it doesn't change, to my mind, anything really significant. And having Don John become whatever it is, Donna, Vani, whatever, you know what? After 2 seconds, I didn't even notice it. So I think it really has to do simply with actor equity, in my opinion. Unless the actor is making a very specific point. And I have seen at least one production where the flipping of the character made a gender-bending love relationship, which was part of it. But I don't think in this case that's there at all. Okay. Maybe one last thought? Okay, well, we're right on point then. So I want to thank you very much for coming out. Thanks to the crew for filming. Thank you. Thanks again for coming.